the human is actually critical to every conversation. People that are working in organizations, they offer huge value because they know the business, and more often than not, they're passionate about it. They can actually be really valuable assets. And if underutilized, that's when things like absenteeism and lack of motivation come into play.
You're very welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. We are delighted to have you here today. This is where we talk about the reality of managing people in a modern workplace, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Wherever you are, please be sure to like, follow, or subscribe. We'd be ever so grateful. Welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by a friend and peer, Karen Ronan. Karen is a dynamic and highly regarded leader with a proven track record in business and sport tourism, stakeholder engagement, and economic development. As CEO of Galway Chamber of Commerce and President of Network Ireland for 2026, she plays a key role in shaping business networks, supporting enterprise growth, and supporting women in business throughout Ireland. She has been instrumental in driving national and regional strategies with a strong focus on ESG and sustainable work practices. Her extensive background in project management and governance has helped her foster valuable connections at local, national, and international levels. Karen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm used to traveling in my car and listening to you on podcasts or on the radio. So it's a privilege to be here as your guest this afternoon, Louisa.
Oh, well, I'm absolutely delighted. I know we've got to know each other really well through the work that we've been doing with Network Ireland. And for anybody listening who's interested in Network Ireland, you can reach out to either of us, but it's an amazing network for professional women throughout Ireland that is built on volunteers. And I wanted to talk to you about that because with Network Ireland, you work with a volunteer management team, senior management team, committees at branch level, and so on and so forth. And also within Galway Chamber, you have a combination where you have the staff of the chamber are paid employees, and that's sort of, the typical employment contract. But because it's a chamber environment, you also work very closely with the board and the president, who are volunteers. So they come to the chamber with different expectations, different needs. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit around the difference of managing people who are volunteers versus managing people who are employees. So what stands out to you as being sort of the fundamental difference, if there is one?
So thank you. It's actually a great question. And I suppose the fundamentals of managing people are the same, whether it's at voluntary level or whether it's a paid employee. You still need to have the same ethical approach. And I think that's really important, whether it's an employee in your organization or somebody that you're working with in a volunteer capacity at community level or on a board. I'm a big believer in empathy being a huge factor in business. I think it's underrated in business a lot of the time. And I recognize in the current situation, a lot of businesses find themselves in, there are pressures coming from outside at a global level, geopolitically, at a national level. But then there's also that pressure in the community or pressure at home. And one of the key things that I always try to keep in mind is that my pressure is not someone else's pressure and vice versa. Now, it's different in a paid capacity because staff will have KPIs, there'll be performance development plans in place, and there'll be an overall strategy that people are working towards. But in a volunteer capacity, you have to recognize that somebody has come to the table in a voluntary capacity to give their time to something meaningful that they're passionate about. And you need to, I suppose, reward them as part of that by enabling them to feel a sense of success out of the time that they're giving. So it's important that they're directed into projects as part of the overall organization, that there's a sense of ownership, that they can lead out on initiatives, and that they feel part of an overall picture of what the organisation is trying to achieve. And underpinning that with strategy is often a critical factor. So if people volunteer for an organisation, like for instance a Chamber of Commerce, they know there's a strategy, they can see where their skill set fits in, it's so much easier for them to put up their hand and say, you know what, I would like to work on that committee, or I recognise that my skills are more associated to this particular activity. But giving people a chance to lead out and to be recognised for their contribution. I never believe that any one person in an organisation should take credibility for what is collective activity. So I do believe in always recognizing somebody's great idea. And I'm a big believer that even if it's 5 years' time before it comes into fruition, to always look back historically as to where things evolved from and recognize that that may have been a conversation of somebody that's maybe not even any longer involved, but that you recognize that contribution throughout. It's all about legacy and impact. Whether it's a paid organization where you have a team of employees or whether it's volunteer led, the legacy and impact is huge. And if people buy into that legacy and impact framework, you can deliver so much more irrespective of whether you're paying somebody or they're giving their time. And it's never free. It's never free time because they're taking that time away from something else. So it has to be meaningful and enjoyable and
Yeah,
rewarding. And that's
yeah.
critical.
No, I think, and like, I have a lot of, I do a number of sort of voluntary pieces of work, and I'm on a few different boards and what have you in a voluntary capacity. And you do put, like, you put as every bit as much effort and time into it as for your paid work. Um, I've always believed it's important to give back. So there needs to be that sort of psychological contract element is stronger, and in some ways in that, or it needs to at least be there, because if it doesn't, nothing is there. At least when you're paid, there's some contract. But when it's voluntary, the psychological contract is the only contract, otherwise there is nothing to fall back on. You said a few different things that actually really resonated with me. I'm going to touch on two of them in isolation, and that one of the words that you used was empathy. Having known you over the last year, that's something that I see in you in spades. Really, it is. And I think it's leaning into femininity in some ways. And I don't mean it in terms of man, woman. I mean it in terms of what we consider softer skills, and recognizing the human being in front of you and connecting with that person on a human to human level. It is so important. So I don't know if maybe there's a situation that you could share from your past where somebody has done that for you, perhaps, or where you've done it with somebody that where it's had a really big impact.
Yeah, I've had a lot of, I would call leaders in my life, both male and female, who were huge champions of me over the years. And a lot of it did come back to, at the very basic level, being kind, paying it forward, giving you an opportunity, making introductions, and recognizing that they were giving back by supporting somebody else in their career. So I've been very fortunate to have some incredible mentors. And one of them pulled me aside many years ago in a time of crisis and said, "It won't always be dark at 7." And I regularly say that to people when they tell me they're having difficulty in their business, or maybe there's an issue going on in home life that's impacting them in the work life. And I will always say, these sayings are great, but having somebody that actually recognizes that we are all in a situation where life can take over. And we've really recognized, having gone through a pandemic, that there are so many issues that it can affect people in their form of employment, that we need to recognize that support structures are critically important in an employment setting. So even things like being able to be supportive of working mothers, working fathers, carers in the home, being able to support people if they need to work from home. I'm a big believer that if you provide a collaborative and an environment where people can come and say, I'm struggling, or I need some support, or I'm at this kind of a juncture career wise and I need a leg up or an introduction. That's a great opportunity to be able to bring those softer skills to play and say, look, I recognize on a human level that we need to have supports in place, whether it's in a volunteer led organization or whether it's in a work environment where we're supporting individuals, because the more supported an individual is, the better the output. So I've often talked about myself in that I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and I suppose people use that very negatively, but to me, I like to be in a position to support people, and I love the idea that I've had so much support in my career, and I've had lots of people that have helped me personally as well to to get to where I am in life. And I like the idea of giving back and being able to support people around me. So I'm a big advocate for kindness, and I'm a big advocate for empathy. But I do believe that as leadership qualities, those are just two of the qualities. You also do have to have conviction and integrity. And in this day and age, governance is such a huge part of how we all operate, whether it's in a voluntary capacity or in a paid capacity, that it's really important that that skill set is, I suppose, that you're bringing people on the journey with you as well in an organization. So you can be as emphatic or kind as you want to be, but at the same time, people need to recognize that we all have somebody we're responsible to. And depending on what activity you're doing at any one time, there are so many dots of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed that, sometimes we do need to be very firm in our conviction, and we need to toe the line and recognize that we're moving away from the values of an organization, or maybe that we need to stick to strategy. So I think, yes, in an ideal environment, you do want to be incredibly supportive. But I think if you put the right structures in place and you have the right parameters for people to work within, it makes it so much easier to recognize if something is falling down, to be able to pick it up very quickly and move along and make sure there's no major impact to the organization in its activities.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me, particularly with my HR background, in that, you know, whenever I think of this, I actually always think of my mum and her rules growing up were, she was very clear. Here's the boundaries, physically. Sometimes you can go to the top of the road, you can go to the corner, you can go to this neighbor, you can go in this, I lived in the country, in this field or that field. If you go beyond this boundary, you're in trouble. And whether it was that physical boundary that expanded as we got older, or different boundaries in terms of behaviors, she was always really clear. This is where the line is. Inside those lines, we could get as messy as we wanted. We could do what we wanted. We had lots of freedom. We crossed those lines, there would be consequences. And it's the same in the workplace. It's like, you want your staff, whether they're voluntary or not, to be creative and imaginative and have self-drive and make their own decisions inside the structure, inside the rule book, inside the governance, as you call it. It's so critical, but you need to be then clear on what that is. And the skills that you've talked to there, whether it's around kindness, around conviction, around governance, and the many other sort of skills that align with leadership. One thing that I see with young people coming up sometimes is that they have this idea that people are born with these skills, or somebody's naturally more has naturally more empathy or kindness or conviction or confidence, I hear all the time, than they do, or than other people do. My personal opinion is that some people may have a natural tendency towards some of those skills, but they are all learned skills, no matter what level of on the spectrum you are, whether you're the most proficient person or the least proficient, you can get better from where you're at. You can always learn. And have you seen that over your career with people that you've been mentoring and supporting, in terms of how they've been able to recognize the ability to grow and taken the steps to do that?
I've even seen it with myself. So
You
you're
were
so
born
right.
this way, Karen.
Every skill can be taught, and every skill can be learned if you have the ambition to do so. So for me, and actually how I found my way into Network Ireland, was because I found networking incredibly difficult. And I, like lots of other people, thought it's a skill. I don't have it. I'm never going to have it. It's always going to be a difficulty. And when I did my TEDx, it was called From the Bathroom to the Boardroom, because I was that person who hid in the bathroom because I was so nervous to go to networking events. And I'd be fine on the one-to-one. And I will always say one of my better skills is to stand on a stage and ad lib, and I don't even need a note. And so people would have looked at me and said, "Oh, you're hugely confident. You can stand up and speak on any topic. You can't possibly have a fear of networking." But I did. And like that, I had to literally go and teach myself and find all the tools that were out there, and peer-to-peer learning and supports, and figure out how to learn to network effectively. And Network Ireland was that safe space for me to be able to do that. And I love to give back, and we talk about giving back. I love to be able to give back by telling people my story, that I wasn't good at networking. I still don't think I'm good at networking. I'm still terrified to open that door in any setting and come into what I perceive to be really, incredible leaders across all sectors of society. And sometimes you have that imposter syndrome. But I've learned over the years that everybody deserves to have a place in the room, and you don't have to be the biggest or bravest or the most outgoing. It's not a personality type. But you do need to practice, and that's the same for any skill, and you need to prepare. It's that famous fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So I never go to a networking event without preparing. Would I stand up on stage and speak without preparing? Yes, because that's a skill set I've mastered over the years. I've just today come from a meeting with a government minister, and someone that I didn't get to connect with yesterday said, sure, you can do it on the hoof, you'll be fine. And then said to me post event, I knew you could do it. I knew you'd be grand. But so you recognize very early in your career where your skill sets lie. And I think just seek out other talent that can help give you that leg up and support you, and teach you the skills that you need to develop the areas that maybe you're not so good at. Because all skills, there's somebody out there, there's so much opportunity. And I thought it was funny that you mentioned that boundary. Because the boundaries for business are so much wider than they were before. So at one point, we could only go to the end of the road, and that's where things stopped for us. But now the entire world is at our fingertips, whether it's on social media, whether it's podcasts, whether it's getting to listen to thought leaders on YouTube. And the world of AI is opening that up even further. So there's huge opportunity to be able to personally and professionally self-develop as well, utilizing everything that's at our disposal. But we do need to do that in an ethical way. Now, that's a whole other conversation. Authenticity is key. No matter what skills you are developing, it's really incredible that you stay true to your authentic self and to the values of the organization that you represent and your own value as well. I was at an event recently where we talked about AI slop and all of the hallucinations that are out there on AI. And then recently I had a huge amount of engagement in the business community where people were saying that we're going to lose that authenticity or that kind of localized thinking, because we are the people that know our business best, we know our community best, we know what impacts us. And if we're reliant on artificial intelligence to tell us how to do our business, then we lose that kind of personal connection, that human factor. And that is incredibly important. So we can utilize everything that's out there at our disposal, but not move so far from ourselves that we actually lose touch with why we're doing it in the first instance, which is to develop ourselves. We don't need AI to develop ourselves as humans. We can get support, but we don't need everything to be AI driven either.
You know, I would actually completely concur with you, and it's really concerning to me when you hear things like AI becoming somebody's therapist or somebody's
Yes.
friend, somebody's, intimate relationship. I don't even know how that works. It will never be my preferred option, but I think AI is a tool the same way as you might use Word or PowerPoint or, a search engine, whatever it might be. But it shouldn't take over either. It should be
No,
a tool that you use, that
no.
you dip into, to come out of. And one thing that I've learned, and I'm sure you're the same in your areas of expertise, is I've gone in sometimes to maybe say, like, write an article on this topic, write a social media post, whatever it might be. And it will produce something that reads really well, that looks great, but that's actually complete rubbish. And I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, that's not
Yes, a
relevant.
complete
It's
AI hallucination. But
completely.
and that's the thing, Louisa. It's the human in the room that is so critical. And that's where the story is. And we're an island of storytellers. And that is what has gotten so many international companies to come and set up in Ireland. It's how we do business. It's how so many international locations light up for St. Patrick's Day. We're a nation of storytellers. And if we lose that, we lose our biggest asset or our niche from a global perspective. So it's really important that, yes, we utilize AI and all the other tools that are out there to support us in business, because that's what they are, they're tools. But the human is the most, and actually your podcast is called The Human Side of Business,
It is.
because the
It is.
human in the room, that is the most important person in any conversation. And that is why, whether it's a volunteer-led organization or it's an employee-based organization, the human is actually critical to every conversation. People that are working in organizations, they offer huge value because they know the business, and more often than not, they're passionate about it. They can actually be really valuable assets. And if underutilized, that's when things like absenteeism and lack of motivation come into play. But making your staff and the people around you part of the conversation is really, really important. And in a volunteer capacity, everyone around the table, they're on a board. with fiduciary responsibility, we have to recognize that because their skill set was valued enough to attract them in. So utilize that. Don't have a board of directors that you're not asking questions of and supporting them in terms of giving them opportunity to be able to deliver for the organization. So that's when you get the most out of organizations, when you're actually working hand in glove with people to actually get the best out of them.
Yeah, no, like I agree. And since, over the last number of years, I've been on a few boards, but I've worked with lots of boards, especially boards and voluntary boards with paid employees, whether it's charities or not-for-profit organizations. And I have never ceased to be amazed at the level of expertise, dedication, commitment, hard work that you can have from a board who's entirely voluntary. And oftentimes lots of the boards that I've worked with, it's people who have maybe retired a little bit earlier, just retired at a normal age, and they don't want to work, but they want to give back their knowledge. So they've reached the pinnacle of their career. They've been in really senior roles, really senior positions, and they're giving their expertise, their time, their knowledge, for free, gratefully. And they enjoy the experience, they get a lot out of it. But I think the boards that are most successful are the ones that have a good relationship with the CEO, with the senior management team, where that relationship is nurtured on both sides so that everybody is benefiting from it. You don't want them to overstep either, and I've seen a little bit of that sometimes too, but where it's a mutually respectful relationship, it really is a beautiful thing to witness in an organization. It has massive, massive benefits.
It does, because as a board of directors, you can look and see where the deficit is in your team in terms of a skill set or a particular area of expertise and go out and attract that person on at board level. But then, as I said, utilize that skill.
Yes.
As Galway Chamber, we have what we call our Chamber Council, which is essentially our board of directors. But from that, we then have a number of working groups, and we've one that works in the whole area of sustainability, both environmental and social, which is a real skill set in its own right. We have one on economic development and enterprise, one dedicated to infrastructure, because Galway has always been an area that's had a deficit in infrastructure, and it's something we've lobbied and advocated for hard over the years. But you need experts. I'm not an expert in the housing market, or I'm not an expert in wastewater. I like to say I kind of know a little bit about a lot, but not the depth that might be needed to put policy together. So you're attracting in that talent. And then we also
You weren't designing the ring road in Galway then.
no,
You were
no,
sitting there
no,
with
no,
your
no, no,
PowerPoint.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it's so funny because you can go from talking about the ring road to talking about wastewater in about 5 minutes, or to talking about affordable housing, and actually how all of these things actually impact people in business. So I had a conversation this morning just about the SME sector. And the really interesting part is that it could be something like infrastructure deficit at a local level, or it could be something like they can't attract talent in because there isn't housing available. And this affects everybody across the country. It's not just Galway. And then I heard a company say that they had invested in capital equipment and it's sitting in the Straits of Hormuz at the moment. And they don't know when that's going to be released. It was investment paid for, sitting at the other side of the Straits. And they literally are thinking, we are so constrained now because we don't have access to what we have paid for. We need it to progress our business. And you're seeing the actual day-to-day impact that a geopolitical issue is having on a small business in the west of Ireland. And then you realise it's a very small world after all. And what happens everywhere has an impact. So not just on the island of Ireland, but internationally, we are affected by all of these shocks. And I think the fuel crisis taught us that recently.
Yes.
Individuals were affected in their home life and people in business were affected. And that's just the reality going forward. All of these shocks, these political shocks, these economic shocks, they affect us all, no matter where we are in society.
They really, really do. And actually, you triggered a memory. I was at a lunch with the governor of the central bank about a year ago, give or take. And it was really interesting listening to him because he's much more wise than I about economics. But listening to him talking about the Irish economy, and all of the metrics are so strong. We are in such a lucky position. And the two areas, I suppose, that he really focused on were the two that you've touched on there. One being infrastructure, and not the fancy infrastructure that people are thinking about, stuff like waste, water, roads, rail, etc. The basic infrastructure to allow business to flourish and grow. And you can't set up a business if your staff have nowhere to live, or they can't
Absolutely.
access clean water. You can't do that. It doesn't work. And then the other being the sort of the geopolitical landscape, which was quite different a year and a half ago to what it is today. But those things are outside of the control of a small local business, but yet they massively impact in any business, be it a small or a large business. Actually, they massively impact, but they're outside of the control of a business. Um, so the other thing that you talked about at the beginning, and I'm going to wrap this up in a second, was about the vision for the future and the strategy and knowing where you're going as an organization, the importance of that for the volunteers, for employees, so that they have that sense of connection to the purpose of the organization. When you put all of those different things together, how do you think businesses can create a vision for the future in a world that, for many, whether it's AI, infrastructure, geopolitical reasons, and other reasons, it feels like we're building a strategy on very unstable footing? So, what would your advice be for the businesses that you work with?
So, for a lot of businesses, it is all about structure. It is having your strategy and having your structure around it and risk register. I keep saying risk register. Be prepared for anything. I worked in the tourism industry before I came to Galway Chamber, and very early in COVID conversations, we were saying, well, what if it was like SARS and what if it became bigger? So we were having those conversations very early when we were just hearing about a couple of cases. So we'd actually risk assessed the entire pandemic before it actually became a pandemic, because we had history of recognizing things that had happened globally and affected other tourism locations. So it is making sure you're aware of the risks. And I think if you're aware of the risks, that helps you to plan and mitigate if any disasters or huge crises come to bear. But I'm a huge believer in peer networks. I think having a peer network where you can learn from other people in your industry that have walked the path. You talked about that talent pipeline coming in at board level. Those are people that have seen all sorts of shocks. I mean, I was going to say in my very short life, but in my very long life, I have seen SARS, foot and mouth, COVID, the recession, and many other things that I'm probably current fuel crisis, geopolitical issues, war, you name it. There's so many. But let's really draw the talent base into our boards and into our voluntary organizations that have walked those paths before us. And they know because a lot of these things are at 360. What worked in the 80s or the 90s may still work today. And sometimes I always say we need to look back and learn from history, not make the same mistakes, but maybe the things that worked well. I've been at 5 meetings recently where people spoke about Ardna Crusha and how at the time it was so forward thinking to have a facility like Ardna Crusha in Ireland, and how much GDP was invested in it at the time, and how outside the box it was. And we're missing a little bit of that creative thinking and risk that we need to put into activities nowadays, because I think we're just so conscious of everything that's going on that we're not really able to take that step outside of our comfort zone. So I think we need to be like the people from the 70s and 80s who were, so far behind that they recognized something massive needed to be done to move Ireland forward and for us to be that huge attractor of global investment that we have become. So we need to learn from the generations that have gone before, but peer networks are a huge part of that. Having somebody that you can bounce ideas from, having somebody that's maybe in your sector, or even learning from other sectors. So what works for one sector may support another in their initiatives as well. So it's that knowledge hub. It's tapping into the knowledge hub that's around you, and collaboration is key. Like absolutely collaborating with other people. You just don't know what you'll get out of it. I'm a big believer in shopping your network. I say it all the time.
Mm.
And no matter where you work, shop your network. Think local first. Who can I potentially give a piece of business to work on a project with? And then if there isn't somebody locally, nationally. And then maybe in our diaspora community, internationally, or alumni communities, can I make a connection that'll support my business endeavors? And like, yeah, let's all work together for the greater good. I'm a big believer in that.
I would actually completely concur. I was asked yesterday, I was asked by somebody about people coming out from a school, maybe 16, 17-year-olds who want to get a summer job, want to get a bit of pocket money. How do they go about it? There's no jobs out there. And actually the advice I gave them was almost identical to what you're saying, at a different level, different type of need. But it was your network. Like, look at your parents, look at who your parents know, look at your friends' parents. Who do they know? Somebody somewhere within your network has access to a business that will give you an opportunity. Talk to those people. Like, just sending your CV and having it be cold and clinical, well, everybody else is doing that. Try and do something that's different, that's opening a door. It won't get you a job, it won't make you successful, but it might get you in through the door to have the first cup of tea or the first conversation, the first
Absolutely.
glimmer of hope. And people, in my experience at least, when you go out and ask for help, people give you help.
People buy people. My very first summer job, I remember asking my parents, did they know a particular local business owner? And they did. And they said, like, there, you'll definitely get a summer job there, but people buy people. You need to walk down and ask for the job. And I was terrified. So did up my CV at the time. I think it was handwritten, and walked down. And they told me afterwards, they gave me the job because I walked in and I asked for it. They'd had lots of other CVs that summer, but it is that personal touch. It's putting yourself again outside the comfort zone and saying, you know, I'd like to work here. And yeah, that's a big opportunity for somebody who's leaving school or maybe who's looking for a summer job, to be able to say to them, go and put that bit of personal touch into the mix and go and say hello to the person, tell them that you're available, leave your contact details. And there's never any harm in following up either. At least they'll see you have good
But
sales skills.
you know what? It's the same skills, like what we would advise the 16-year-old to do when we're not 16 anymore. We won't have to give away our ages. It's the same skills, but sometimes we become too comfortable in what we know and too afraid of being seen. I don't even know, like, is it a weakness or a vulnerability? We don't want to be seen as being vulnerable by asking for help, but people love helping people for the
We all
most
need
part.
to ask for help. You know, no matter how long you're in business, ask for help. I heard somebody today, they were looking at new avenues for marketing their idea, and they brought other representatives from the organization across all different age groups together. And somebody told them that the best place for them to advertise was on Spotify. And they did. And as a result, they found a whole new cohort of member for their organization, which was never on their sphere at all. Like, they would be doing the traditional, maybe Instagram, even a bit of TikTok. But it turned out that a whole sector of society are listening to podcasts all the time on Spotify. And it is a great place to advertise.
Yeah, I didn't know you could advertise on Spotify. I'm going to have to look
Yeah.
this up. So there you
Now,
go.
the budget might be an issue,
The budget
Louise.
could be an issue, but you never know. We can always look at things and have aspirational hope.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
fascinating, isn't it? And I do think, but it's those conversations, and that's the importance of being a volunteer in an organisation, of networking, of community, of Galway Chamber and the other chambers throughout the country, and Network Ireland and all the other networks. It is that opportunity to go out and talk to somebody who they might be in the same industry as you, they might be doing something similar to you in a different industry, but the probability is that they will share their knowledge of what's worked and what hasn't worked. You don't have to do what they did, but hearing what they did will always be of benefit to you, even if it's not right for you or you're not going to follow that path. And you also get the opportunity to share what you've done. And I know I've heard you say this on stage several times, that you should never look down on somebody unless you're looking down to give them a helping hand up. And I love that
Absolutely.
saying.
And leave the ladder down for the next person coming behind you, because that's really, really important. You know, we get to where we are with support from people, and don't ever forget that you've had support on your journey, and always be willing to put a hand down or leave the ladder down for the next person coming behind.
Look, Karen, I think that is very insightful, and really, really key. So I'm not going to ask you any more questions from myself, but we do have a tradition here where we have the last guest leave a question for the next guest. So I'm going to ask
Okay.
you that question in a wrap-up capacity. So the question that was left for you, it's a slightly longer, but it's a very good one. If you could meet yourself from 20 to 30 years ago for let's say a glass of wine, what advice would you give them? What could you tell them of your life over the last 20 or 30 years that would make them proud or happy or excited?
I would say follow your heart, because I've done that over the years. I used to go to job interviews and say, I'm not money motivated. I'm here for the love of the job, and be that right or wrong. And I'm not saying I'm not money motivated today, but be that right or wrong, when I was younger, I found myself in a career where I absolutely loved getting up every day and going to work. And my kids find that really hard to believe, that all throughout my working life, I have absolutely loved everything that I've done. And I've had a real sense of achievement. I really feel like I've made a difference in the different organizations I've worked in. I think embrace difference in society, be inclusive, embrace the diversity of the world we live in today, because everybody has a role to play. I'm a big advocate for including people with disabilities, people who are neurodivergent into the conversation. I love to think that the Ireland of 2050 or 2070 will be a truly inclusive society. We have a lot of work to do to get there, but I think play your part. I think be a louder voice is what I would have said to my younger self in that story. And then really just continue with your values. I've never moved away from my values, as I said, of empathy and kindness and supporting other people, because those are values that I'm very proud of. And I think really, just really and truly having that integrity in business as well, because people buy people. And if people can trust you, I think that's half the battle to being able to move your business forward. So, and have fun along the way. I've had an incredible career. It's not over yet. I've traveled the world. I have met some incredible people. I've made so many friends. And also, my other last and final thing on this is, don't be afraid to network. Join lots of networking organizations. Don't hide in the bathroom like me. I missed out on so much by not embracing networking earlier in my career. So don't hide in the bathroom. Get out there, network, and join lots of networks, because they all intersect, and you just meet as a whole cohort of people that you wouldn't otherwise get to interact with.
I think that's great advice. Absolutely phenomenal advice. And if anybody out there is nervous about networking, Karen's TEDx talk is amazing and definitely worth listening to. So we should share the link to that as well, and then people can join you there and have a look. Karen, it's been an
Thank
absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Human Side of Business podcast.
you, Louisa.